It's my pleasure to introduce our next presenter. He's the founding executive director of M-Foresight, Alliance for Manufacturing Foresight, a national consortium on emerging technologies and advanced manufacturing with a singular focus to enhance U.S. manufacturing competitiveness. He's also the Herrick Professor of Engineering and Professor of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Michigan. So please help me welcome Dr. Sridhar Koda.
Okay, thanks to SME for giving me an opportunity to share with you some of our findings. I guess when it offshoring production, I think we are all quite familiar with that. We've been living that in that paradigm for 2 or 3 decades now. So there's nothing new there. The new what we learned in a hard way is we are actually also offshoring innovation. And this is something that I wanted to share with you, some of the findings of what we've done. So this is really a dangerous trend for a developed country as a whole, not just for US manufacturing. So first of all, we all believe that we are the most innovative country in the world, and how could we possibly be offshoring innovation? But if you actually think about the definition of innovation, it's very different from discovery and invention. And of course, we loosely use the term innovation to mean whatever it is, discovery or invention, but innovation is really about transforming a promising idea into a practical solution, and through world-class engineering. If you apply that definition, if you think about the last 20 or 30 years, we haven't done much of that, especially when it comes to hardware. Whether it's the lithium-ion batteries or solar cells or what have you, cell phones, we haven't done much of technology innovation in this country. And part of that is because of the erosion of what Willy Shih calls it from Harvard Business School, erosion of industrial commons, the engineering talent, the production know-how, the infrastructure, and even the supply chains. So with that definition, actually, however, today manufacturing, as we all know, is increasingly digital, distributed, and democratized, as opposed to dull, dirty, and dangerous. And certainly the smart manufacturing, under the broad umbrella of smart manufacturing industry 4.0, it does play to our American strengths in terms of the flexibility and adaptability, a large capital market. We have the best universities in the world. So that's the narrative, at least in terms of the best universities in the world. But I just want to clarify a few things before I get to the main topic. One is, there is so much written about how robots and AI are going to take over our jobs. There's just too much hype, and that's not true. Robots and AI are not taking manufacturing jobs. They have not in the past. I'll get to that. And there's a lot of discussion about skills gap, but there are some excellent programs across the country that are actually being developed and deployed, and we need to scale them nationwide. I can address that question later on if you talk about it. And there's a lot of discussion about the folks, usually the journalists or economists, write about manufacturing as service. So we don't need to worry about manufacturing. It's all manufacturing as service. That doesn't mean just because you're providing thrust hours, General Electric does it, but somebody's still got to make the jet engine. So we all understand it, but this narrative can have some negative implications on the policy at the national level. So the question I would like you to think about is that given these trends that I'm going to point out, can the US establish, let alone lead, industries of the future? So first thing about the robots and automation, I want to get it out of the way. We lost nearly 6 million jobs in the last decade, and actually 17 out of 19 manufacturing sectors saw a decline. And if you look at it, it's not the robots that caused, it's offshoring that caused the job loss. And there's plenty of evidence to show that. If you actually think about, if you look at this picture, look at the numbers here, number of robot shipments, US robot shipments going back to 96 through 2014, it's just linear. If the robots and automation actually caused the job loss, you would have had a hockey stick. And even if you look at the numbers, this 5,000, 15,000, 10,000 more shipments, There's plenty of other data to show that's not the case, but that narrative is actually dangerous. And actually, if you think about the countries that are actually way ahead of us in terms of manufacturing strength, like South Korea, Germany, and Japan, they have many more robots, per 10,000 workers, called the robot density. If you look at it, South Korea has 6 times as much as we do. And Germany and Japan has twice as many robots as we do, but they seem to be doing just fine. So the robots actually do create, and I pointed out about how Mercedes-Benz and Toyota actually, cobots are the ones that actually help create jobs and enhance productivity. So that's something I wanted to point out. And actually, there's a lot of talk about how the manufacturing sector is rebounding. If you actually peel back and look at the data as of last quarter, the net change in U.S. manufacturing employment, you see the job losses in red and the job gains in blue, and the net job gains are not that much. Only 3 sectors: food manufacturing, and transportation equipment, and oil and gas. These are the only 3 sectors there is some positive job growth. But most other sectors, particularly advanced industries, we have a decline. Not only decline in employment, but actually manufacturing productivity that we talk about. It is declining, it's flat or actually declining. The total factor productivity has actually declined. If you actually pay attention to this section of it, what's happening there, the total factor productivity fell by 5.8% compared to what it was during the recession. So that's the underlying message about the state of, and of course, our keynote speaker has already talked about the defense, how it affects our national security because of this increasing dependence on foreign suppliers and all the other things that you all know very well about. So just to want to point out, back a couple of hundred years ago, what Adam Smith said about if any particular manufacturer was necessary, we can depend on our neighbors to provide those. And fast forward 200 years later, or almost 200 years later, anyway, in 2012, Senate Armed Services Committee reported about 1 million counterfeit parts in our military supply chain, and that hasn't gotten much better. And last year's report to the president about our defense threats, there are significant threats across all different factors in the defense supply chain. So that's, again, the erosion of our industrial commons in the manufacturing in this country. So what we did last year, we did several roundtable discussions around the country. M4 site we did in the cities that are listed there. And we asked, what's happening is invent here manufacturing there paradigm has shifted to invent there, manufacture there, innovate there, manufacture there, and that's a dangerous trend. And we spent over 1,200 hours of discussion without any PowerPoint slides, without admiring the problem. People admired the problem before coming to the meeting. So we just asked people, what do we do about it? Those 3 questions we tried to answer and spent 1,200 hours discussing that. And I'm going to share with you in the next 10 minutes some of the findings. And just a quick point here, the net U.S. exports in advanced industries, you can see that the positive trade balance only in 2 sectors. Certainly the aerospace is one sector where you have positive balance. And barely engines and turbines, if you see just slightly above 0, and slightly below 0 is medical devices. The rest, everything else, the advanced sectors, we have a negative trade balance. And for those who think that maybe the government should not interfere with private sector markets, actually the aerospace has a lot to do with the government investment and procurement. So just want to point that out. So is medical devices too. Government does play a role in that. If you look at even the stuff that's made in the US, the import penetration, if you think about in advanced technology. So if you look at those, I just circled one of them. This is the imported content of the goods manufactured in the US. Certainly basic consumer goods, we know there's significant penetration just about everything. But even if you look at technology-driven innovative products, we actually lost 13 percentage points. That much more penetration in US-made manufactured goods. So that's how we are eroding away our foundational capabilities, and that has significant implications. So invent here, make there, what that happened was we are creating knowledge, but we are not creating wealth. When I say wealth, I don't mean for a few individuals in Silicon Valley, but I'm talking about creating national wealth. So we are creating knowledge. This is an iconic picture of an iPhone, iPod, whatever you call it. The underlying technologies, whether it's the micro hard drive, not in the iPad, but iPhone, but regardless, the lithium-ion battery, LCD display, and that smaller text underneath shows going back to the 80s and 90s where the government has funded basic research that led to the discoveries and inventions under the knowledge that is supported all the inventions that you see there. So we have created that knowledge, but obviously we haven't created the national wealth from that knowledge. And that's because we are very good at doing the discoveries and inventions. Just the first step. We are still the best in the world in doing that. But that's only just kind of going to the first base. You have to go around to score. So when it comes to the startups and scale-ups and pilot production and scale production, we are not doing much of that. And by not doing that, we are actually, we are not learning by doing. So that is the biggest challenge. So no wonder we spend about $150 billion a year in R&D, in science and technology, but at the end of the year, we have an $800 billion trade deficit, and of which, more importantly, about $100 billion trade deficit in advanced technology products. So this is because, because we are not closing the circle. We are not going around the circle, and this is essentially the learning by doing is what we are missing out. The real innovations come about, the process innovations that we haven't done much of. So even though we are leading the world in R&D, that should be little comfort if we are simply subsidizing that R&D, our knowledge, our discoveries, our inventions for other countries. And here this is a notional chart. Back in the good old days of the 80s, when we had MRI machines and robots and machine tools and what have you, this notional chart shows that the one in green is primarily innovation done here, scaled manufacturing done here, for a period of time, for 5, 10, 15 years, before the components and the subsystems and the entire thing is made overseas. So that took a while in the beginning, but then as you come down to laptops, well, we didn't make them for a very long time before it went overseas. When you come down to flat panel displays, we really didn't do much of that at all, and the cell phones, hardly anything. And when you come to solar cells, and we know the story behind that, there's nothing going on there. Lithium-ion batteries, we had the lead, we had the technology back in the early 90s, but obviously we aren't doing much of that, except more recently with Tesla and a few other companies that are the transplants here. But the emerging technologies, or the current technologies like flexible electronics and nanotechnology, not much, because we have not manufactured flat panel displays. We don't have the capability to manufacture flexible displays, put it in simplistic terms. Here I want to show you one chart. This is the ranking of nations on nanotechnology. The government, the taxpayer dollars, were about $30 billion invested in nanotechnology in the last 15 years. And if you look at how this company, Lux Research, ranked various countries, each bubble represents a country, as you can see. If you just pay attention to the top half of the countries, you're looking at the nanotechnology activity on the vertical axis, technology development strength, meaning how you're bringing those ideas into products. And if you look at the top half, and you can see that the typical actors are, Taiwan, South Korea, Germany, Japan, they are in the dominant category. And of course, the US, in terms of the nanotechnology activity, is really off the charts. But you can see that they are in the dominant category. US is actually moving towards the ivory tower category, the trend lines, if you see, from small bubble to larger bubble. So again, we are creating knowledge. We are not exactly creating products and processes and creating wealth from them. So here is another quick example. They studied 150 hardware startups from MIT. And those 150 startups raised close to about $4 billion, which most universities cannot do, but MIT, good for them, they've done that. But out of 150 manufacturing startups, the point is none of them scaled in the US. And 70% of them scaled in China. So when they were ready for prime time, we lacked the resources, we lacked the production know-how. So this is what I'm talking about. If these trends, as they are continuing, how can we establish, let alone lead, in the industries of the future? And innovate there, manufacture there. Innovation happens faster here. They're talking about China. And 45, nearly 50% of the foreign R&D centers, these are $300, $400, $500 million centers, as each one established in China, are actually US companies. I get that because the large multinationals, they have over 50% of their assets, the 50% of their revenues, or 50% of their employees are overseas. I get that. But whatever it is, they are actually innovating there. And for all other reasons, we know why it's done. But it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we are having some fundamental issues with that. So what are the factors driving manufacturing R&D to China? This is based on 369 manufacturers. Why are they moving to China for R&D? And the top 3 reasons you can see are related to proximity to high growth market, proximity to manufacturers, and proximity to suppliers. Not only that, I want to point out other things too, besides the obvious lower development costs, access to technical talent. So this is pretty dangerous. And if you think about the investments we are making and what we are getting out of it, out of universities, for every $1 billion of R&D activity funded by the taxpayers, we get about $52 million in license revenues, which is not much. But actually our national labs and federal labs, both the DoD and DOE labs, they do much worse. For every $1 billion in R&D activity, you get $4 million in revenue. That's not how you want to spend your money, but we do. So, of course, we all know venture capitalists rarely invest in hardware. And obviously, for the reasons that we all understand, they invest in software and biotech. And if you actually go deeper into where they're actually investing, anything related to hardware comes to about less than 4%. So if you look at even the venture capital market, of course, the vast majority is US venture capitalists investing in venture capital market here, and a small fraction from other countries, and particularly from China, it's only not that much. So, but actually, if you peel back and look at where they're investing, and if you look at China's investments in US aerospace industry, look at the bottom line in terms of the companies that their mergers and acquisitions. Those are not small mom and pop shops. Those are some serious companies that Chinese have acquired through mergers and acquisitions. And there are others with joint ventures and other agreements. So we certainly enjoy the duopoly between Boeing and Airbus now, but unless we double down, I'm not sure how much longer that's going to last. So the market failures-wise, the large multinational corporations, they do what's best for them for the immediate 3-month shareholder profit. That is their driver. So that's hard to change. And much of the R&D investments in private sector is only for current product development, not investing in the next big thing. There's no patient capital in investing in next big thing like the Bell Labs used to do 50 years ago. But when it comes to public sector, we are truly exceptional in that we are the only country without a strategy what to do with our good ideas. But we certainly, thanks to federal government, did invest in science, but not so much in engineering and manufacturing R&D. And there is really no focal point in manufacturing. So if you think about the aerospace, that industry did not spring up soon after Wright brothers flew in Kitty Hawk, but it took a while. We understand the history. Government played a major role in investment and procurement to create the industries on the top row, from aerospace to semiconductors to internet and what have you. And the question is the ones in the bottom row, and there are others, I didn't want to fill the whole chart with it, but are we poised to lead the world in industries of the future? What drones, I'm not sure, that's probably already gone. And then think about the electric vehicles and lithium-ion batteries and autonomous vehicles and flexible electronics and flexible solar cells. By the way, flexible solar cells is already happening in South Korea. And it's very unlikely the flexible electronics will take the lead in this country in spite of billions of dollars investment in research. And so it's not just how much we invest, it's what we invest in. If I can bring it to your attention, we invest about $150 billion a year in science and technology, we as a government and taxpayer dollars, through all the agencies, Department of Defense and Energy and National Science Foundation and all the agencies. Out of which 0.5% is what we invest in what's called industrial production and technology. This is the OECD definition, which is really going to engineering and manufacturing R&D. So we spend 0.52%. Look at the other countries like Germany. Their total budget is only $36 billion, but they spend over $4 billion in that category. Japan spends 3 times as much, and South Korea spends 8 times as much as we do. So it's not so much about the low-cost labor. That has nothing to do with this discussion. If you think about these countries, Japan, Germany, and South Korea, they are high-wage countries. Wages in Germany are 40% higher than here. They have always been that way. Their energy costs are higher, and their pollution abatement costs, and there are stricter regulations. But obviously, those countries are competing with the same China that we are competing with, but they seem to be winning in terms of having strong advanced manufacturing sector with trade surpluses, and we obviously have trade deficits. And 17 out of 19 manufacturing sectors have been declining for nearly 2 decades. So the same information shown here graphically, you can see the same thing. The total R&D spent on industrial production and technology, and you see where U.S. is. So in our roundtable discussions, we talked about, is 5% a reasonable investment for the United States to invest in? 5% of $150 billion, about $7.5 billion. Put that in perspective, according to the White House and DoD estimates, we lose over $2 billion a day to China on IP theft and other issues. So we lose $2 billion a day. We're talking about investing $7.5 billion a year. So we need to look at the cycle of innovation again. If you think about where the federal money is invested in science, which I'm glad to do, and we should continue to do that. We are still the best in the world in that regard. But the leaks in our gaps in our innovation cycle, it starts with the foreign students. About nearly 60% of our foreign students in engineering are foreign students. And unfortunately, many of them are going back. Many of them are going back on their own too. So that's not good. So fully educated and trained, accomplished, smart folks are leaving. After spending years of funding from National Science Foundation, many of our professors at universities now want to take the idea to the next level. There's no funding when it comes to that because we fund only science. So they are attracted to other countries, particularly in Asia, to set up labs over there to take the idea and mature it over there. So we are losing that. Only a small fraction of those people try to make startups. And actually, if you think about, look at the data across the tech transfer offices in our country, across the universities, most of those patents are just languishing there. Nobody is paying attention to it, except some of our foreign-owned companies and others. I don't mean foreign government-backed entities actually have direct access to the data. So we are actually willingly giving away our IP. IP theft is a serious issue that needs to be addressed, but we are willingly giving away every day. And when it comes to, obviously, scale-ups, you heard the MIT story, so there's more of the same. So we are not doing any scale-up at all. So what we need to do is, in terms to close the gaps, what our findings and recommendations in our manufacturing prosperity report is, we need to fund R&D in engineering and manufacturing. Not just science, but science is not engineering. They're kind of different. They're very different. And we also need to quadruple our graduate fellowships in engineering to domestic graduate students. So we have a larger pool of students to work at Northrop Grumman or wherever. And not just publish and perish with our ideas, but take the ideas beyond publications. So if we establish translational research centers at universities and give them 5% of the budget going into maturing the technologies that they think are valuable, then we can build the skill base, we can mature the technologies rather than giving it away whoever knocks on the door. And certainly we have done this before. From aerospace to semiconductors, we have leveraged the defense procurement particularly, right? If the DoD says, I'll buy the first 500,000 batteries from your company, you can take that letter to the bank and get the investments. All you need, $100 or $200 million, and start the production for defense and then eventually scale up to commercial scale, as just an example. We can leverage that. We need to leverage defense government procurement and fund pilot production. right? Otherwise, the drop-in replacements don't happen overnight once the technology is, once you patent it. It's a very laborious process, as you all know. So we need to nurture that. We need to have an idea what to do with our good ideas. And most importantly, just look at Germany, as you all know. Their real strength is in small and medium-sized manufacturers. Our small and medium-sized manufacturers are struggling with the cost-cutting and all other challenges. And they don't have resources to invest in innovation and all the things we talk about. So the government has an important role to play in supporting them, in providing loans and investments, and engaging with the innovation ecosystem, because they never had China plan. They always either survived or decimated in this country. So they need to be empowered. And once you have a strong small and medium-sized companies, then the big guys will come. Somehow the Siemens and Toyotas, they found a way to not only survive, but to thrive in this country. And I think we can do more of that if we empower small and medium-sized manufacturers. In our report, we actually specifically identify steps, exact recommendations in there. In the lack of time now, I don't want to go into detail. And certainly create a public-private investment fund. Some states are doing a very good job in creating this investments fund, like example in South Carolina, to invest in these manufacturing scale-ups. And we need to scale it big time in order to be able to fund these manufacturing scale-ups. So essentially establish a national manufacturing foundation. The idea is that we have all the dots, we have all the essentials already in place, from National Science Foundation, NASA, to our Department of Defense and its labs, Department of Energy. We have all those things. We are really funding the basic research, and we should continue to do that and maybe even double down. But what we are missing is that one missing piece in the puzzle, that is no agency has manufacturing as the focus. Each agency has its own mission. So unless we have that focused effort and a sustained investment, take the best ideas coming out of those places, and then mature them, nurture them, and provide the right support system, not just the funds, but also when I'm talking about the procurement and what have you, and engaging the private sector and small companies, we can turn those ideas, not just create wealth, but actually create jobs, but also help our national security, because as you know, there are several challenges in national security realm. So there are many examples. In the interest of time, I'm just going to take a couple of words here. I can go into detail. Even the smart manufacturing. Now, it's one thing for GE and Siemens and Northrop and Boeing to do it, but unless it goes down to small and medium-sized manufacturers, it's not happening. So we need to provide assistance in terms of these companies to upgrade their equipment in many ways, whether it's a virtual reality or whether it's a data analytics or what have you. So there is much to be done in that area, because as I said, that actually plays to our strengths in this country. Semiconductor packaging that went to Asia back in the 60s and 70s because of the high labor content. By the way, the semiconductor packaging is fully automated back there in Hong Kong and Macau and China. There's no reason why we can't bring it back. Once you bring that back, there's a lot of other elements will come together in the semiconductor supply chain. And pharmaceuticals. We have invented, developed at Rutgers University and other places, the continuous manufacturing method where you can produce these pharmaceuticals at a lower cost, at a better quality in this country. I don't know if we're just going to sit on that idea or actually leverage that and there are others. So, in summary, what I want to say is that offshoring production to offshoring innovation, that's actually a dangerous trend for a developed country. Only thing left after that is distribution. We can give up manufacturing. So we need a national strategy and a sustained investment to create national wealth and also to ensure national security. So the other countries are not standing still. They are busy working on, whether it's China 2030 or what have you. So we need to get our act together. The onus is on us. So I'll stop here, and I thank you very much. You have any questions?
Sridhar, thank you. That was, as usual, an outstanding presentation.
Thank you.
Prior to you going back to the University of Michigan and also starting up M Foresight, You were with the President's Office of Science and Technology Policy and worked with President Obama in setting up what now is Manufacturing USA and the National Institutes, Manufacturing Innovation Institutes. What is different about your manufacturing foundation versus Manufacturing USA?
Okay, good question. The Manufacturing USA institutes are narrowly focused, and understandably so. You know, one on additive manufacturing, one on flexible electronics, one on photonics. So those are, the purpose of the institute is to mature the technology readiness and manufacturing readiness levels for those targeted technologies. Whereas National Manufacturing Foundation is much broader, much bigger, because besides these 14 institutes, there are so many other technologies that we are losing every day. It is about the $150 billion we are spending on science and technology, right? You know, you buy a phone or a watch and you pay 5% on insurance to get an extra, you know, extra warranty for a year or so. It's kind of like that. It is 5% if you invest in that to make sure that our investments in $150 billion insurance on that, some of those other technologies will actually lead to creating products in this country. So it's much broader in scope in terms of investing in R&D for broadly across various technology areas and other things I talked about.
Following up on the same question, the Composites Manufacturing Institute, that has followed some of your sort of recommendation. I don't know whether it came first or your recommendations came first, but it does put small and medium enterprises together to provide a supply chain for manufacturing development. So again, coming back to the same question, why would you want to centralize something into one manufacturing institute and sort of make it one choke point, so to speak?
It's not centralizing an institute per se. It's actually like a national science foundation. The idea is to have a central focus in the government whose purpose is to focus on manufacturing broadly, advanced manufacturing, whatever the technology may be, right? I listed composites over there as an example of the opportunities that we need to seize. We certainly have the Composite Institute, I get that. But this is much broader than that. Maybe I should not have put the composites in that list, but I take your point well.
So prior to manufacturing, I was an educator. And one of the things I loved focusing on was helping students at a very young age understand what they want to do. Well, you know, what do they think they want to do? And that's always based on what they've been exposed to, number one. So our education system does not expose our children to manufacturing. I guarantee you that. Number two, if you look in the governmental publications about manufacturing, you will see every negative comment you could find. And that is what our curriculum directors of educational institutions use to guide their students. And then when I worked, returning back to school to learn more about organizational development, I worked in the universities and saw how professors would strongly want advisors to put people in their departments to help them with their publications, which never had anything to do with manufacturing. So
Yes.
then I went to universities and talked to them about their manufacturing programs and what that looked like. And they said they can't attract anybody, and it's so expensive to keep up with the technology and equipment in the universities to teach the students appropriately all the fundamentals, that they can't barely exist. So we got to start with the root cause. And the root cause is exposing children at a young age to all the fascinating minds of this world that are creating things. We cut out art, which helps us with 3D vision, blueprinting, designing, and yet we don't nurture art. I mean, we've got a lot of work to do at a very fundamental stage.
Yes, if I can react to that, completely agree with you. I just want to point out that the education system, always from starting with grade 1, we'll try to breed the creativity out of kids. And we want everyone to become go to Harvard and get a PhD in physics. That's our only focus. But at the same time, once you expose kids to the wonders of engineering and manufacturing, everything that's designed and built around us, they get it. I have data to show that millennials actually get it in terms of, although 54% of the Proto Labs did an excellent survey last year. 54% of millennials think on one hand that all the manufacturing jobs will be taken over by AI and robotics and robots. This is what I'm talking about, this narrative without any sense that people write about that can cause a lot, reality is not, perception is not reality, but the consequences of perception can be real. On the other hand, there are some very positive things happening. What this career and technical education is supposed to be not for my kids, but your kids, go to community college, it was a second tier thing. Used to be the mentality. That's gradually changing. That's changing in a very positive way. I have slides, I don't want to, because we're running out of time, I don't want to get into it, but I will share that with you. So there, whether it's in Oregon or West Virginia or New York and Ohio, Las Vegas, they have programs where the kids go to 2.5 days to high school, other 2.5 days to career technical education, where they actually get English and math credits, but also learn about the virtual reality and other cool stuff. So it's not that the kids who are not interested in education want to do that, but nowadays they are lining up the good, the academically good, accomplished children also want to go and get this kind of education, which is a good thing. It's slowly evolving. But we need to do that. Coming to the universities, of course, I've written a couple of hundred papers myself, and I know they haven't made much of an impact. So the point is, in science, that is the currency for science. If you discover water on Mars, you want to tell the whole world right now, right? But if it's a better recipe in engineering that you come up with for a 3D printing or something, you don't want to tell the whole world right now. You need to invest, you need to do hard work going beyond the publication. We can't simply afford to publish and to perish, because they call it publish or perish in science. So we need to be able to take the idea further and do something with it, right? To create a better mousetrap. That's the focus we got to change. That is, we confuse between science and engineering. There's no reason to. We don't confuse between marketing and accounting. But science and engineering, yeah, they're about the same. They're not. So we need to have focus back where we used to have strengths in engineering. And that's the part of the reason about this National Manufacturing Foundation that invests heavily on engineering R&D. That's fundamentally different from science. Science is fantastic. Let the scientists do the real science, right? So there are some positive trends, but points well taken. We're running out of time. All right. Thank you.